Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Lehman. Unfortunately, I'm not really in your class today because I'm teaching a health lesson today for Mrs. Graham. So today I'm going to teach you via YouTube. So if at any point you have a question or you need something to be repeated or whatever, you can always ask the substitute to pause the video. Alright, so the first thing, you should have your bell ringer done at this point, and it says express the following as an integer. Now, as a quick review, an integer is a whole number that is either positive or negative or zero. Okay, those are integers. No decimal points, no fractions. Okay, so a loss of $40, the key word here is loss, right? So that's going to indicate a negative number, so negative 40. 34 degrees below zero, that's also going to tell us that that's a negative number, so negative 34. The freezing point of water in degrees Celsius, this is one of those things that you will need to know for science and for life. That is 0. And 0 is considered neither negative nor positive, so it's kind of neutral territory. For a credit of $10. Now, a lot of kids get confused that credit is a negative thing, but think about it like store credit. If someone gives you store credit, that means you have money to spend. Like Kohl's Cash is store credit, all right? So that's a positive 10. Now, you don't have to write the positive sign on an integer necessarily, because it's kind of like a decimal point at the end of a number. It's implied. If you don't have it there, it is positive, okay? So unless you see a negative symbol, assume that the number is positive. A debit of $5. Now, a debit looks a lot like debt. The word debt is spelled D-E-B-T, and that means negative 5. Okay, so that's money coming out of your account. All right, we're going to move on to lesson 2 in your module book, which is real world positive. Actually, no, we're going to be moving on to lesson 4, but we're going to review this vertical number line first from lesson 2 and the real world positive and negative numbers in 0 and the number line here, exit ticket. It says write a story problem that includes both integers, negative 8 and 12. So maybe you can pause the video for a quick second and some people can share what they came up with for a situation where there's a loss of 8 and a gain of 12. Maybe if you're talking temperatures, maybe you could say something like the temperature was 8 degrees below 0 in the morning, and by noon it had warmed up to 12 degrees. In that case, if you use the temperature, 0 would represent the freezing point of water. So kind of where you, if it's degrees Celsius, that's where you would be kind of seeing that transition from rain to snow. Anyway, so if you're talking about money, 0 represents usually a starting balance, right, before any money is deposited, before any money is taken out. But anyway, if you guys want to spend, like a minute sharing some stories, that'd be fine, and we can move on. All right, the opposite of a number is what we're going to talk about today for lesson 4. So in your module book, we are on page. Let's see, I think you are on page, please hold, page 11, okay? And it says, walk the number line. Number 1, each integer has an opposite denoted negative a. So if a is the original number, you'd write it as negative if you're talking about its opposite. Negative a and a are opposites if they are on opposite sides of 0 and the same distance from 0 on the number line. So you guys are wired for opposites because you're teenagers, right? If your parents say up, you say down. If they say right, you say left. It's kind of just in your oppositional nature. So opposites on the number line, it's kind of like the evil twin, right? One's on the positive side and one is on the negative side of 0. So the first one, example, says every number has an opposite. Locate the number 8 and its opposite on the number line and explain how they are related to 0. So let's take a look at this. So we are going to locate 8. It's right here. And the opposite of a positive 8 is going to be a negative 8. So that would be here. So here is 0 right in the center. Okay, so this, to get from 0 to 8, that's a jump of 8, right? And then to get from here to here, that's a jump of 8 as well, except for one is jumping to the right and one is jumping to the left. So, you know, they both have the same distance from 0, and we're going to talk about that when we talk about absolute value. Locate and label the opposites of the numbers on the number line. So we're not going to label the first number, we're going to locate and label the opposites of these numbers. All right, so the opposite of 9 is -9, so we're going to plot -9 right there. So let's make maybe a line here, and we'll do this, and we'll write opposite so that we know the opposite of 9 is -9. The opposite of -2 is going to be +2. Right? If we have a positive number, 4, for example, the opposite of that is going to be -4. The opposite of -7 is going to be +7. So that's what your number line should look like when you are done. All right, I'm going to scroll down a little bit here, and it says, write the integer that represents the opposite of each situation. Explain what 0 means in each situation. So, let's write 0, and then we're going to write opposite. Because this can get kind of confusing. All right, so 100 feet above sea level. So 0 is what we would consider sea level. The opposite of being 100 feet above sea level, so that's written like that, right? The opposite of that is going to be 100 feet below sea level. Right, so that's our first example. Our second example says 32 degrees below 0. So 0 is going to be what we consider our freezing point in degrees Celsius, of course. And the opposite of 32 degrees below 0 is going to be 32 degrees above 0. All right. And the last one, it says a withdrawal of $25. Withdrawal means you're taking money out of your account. So this one would be a -25. Oh, we should write that this one is a -32 up here as well. All right, so we have -25. So if we have 0 in the account, that would be what we would call our starting balance. And then the opposite of taking 25 out would be putting $25 in your account. All right, so that's what you should have on your paper. Please make sure you label everything so that it's very clear. So this is pretty easy. Like I said, if a number is positive, its opposite is going to be negative, and vice versa. So the opposite of a negative number is a positive number. The other thing that you need to remember with this is that they are the same distance from 0 on the number line. It's just in the opposite direction, okay? So it's the same amount if we're talking about 100 above sea level and 100 below sea level. It's just one is going up, one is going down. All right, so let's move on to the next page. And this question's a little bit lengthy. It says, Maria decides to take a walk along Central Avenue to purchase a book at the bookstore. On her way, she passes the Furry Friends pet shop and goes in to look for a new leash for her dog. Furry Friends pet shop is 7 blocks west of the bookstore. She leaves Furry Friends pet shop and walks toward the bookstore to look at some books. After she leaves the bookstore, she heads east for 7 blocks and stops at Ray's pet shop to see if she can find a new leash at a better price. Which location, if any, is the furthest from Maria while she is at the bookstore? So, all right, let's see. So we've got Maria. She's taking a walk. She's passing Furry Friends to look for a leash. It's 7 blocks west of the bookstore. So let's say the bookstore is her kind of starting place. So we're going to label this the bookstore. And so that's where she's starting, okay? Oh wait, is that where she's starting? Maria decides to take a walk along Central Ave to purchase a book at the bookstore. On her way, she passes the Furry Friends pet shop and goes in. It's 7 blocks west of the bookstore. Well, let's see if this works. So let's go 7 blocks west. Now, if you guys remember a compass rose in social studies class, this is north, this is south, this is west, this is east. So she is going 7 blocks west, so she's going to the left. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you're counting the jumps from the bookstore. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is where Furry Friends is. So Furry Friends Pet Shop is right there. And then it says she leaves. Oh, we should underline some things. 7 blocks west. She leaves Furry Friends and walks toward the bookstore to look at some books. After she leaves the bookstore, so right now she's at the bookstore, okay? She heads east for 7 blocks and stops at Ray's Pet Shop. So we gotta go 7 blocks to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, I'm not going to have you draw those little jumpy doos on your paper. I'm gonna erase them on the smartboard. So we know it's 7 blocks over there. Over though, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're going to call that Ray's. So she's comparison shopping here at Ray's. It says, at which location, if any, is the furthest from Maria? Well, she's at the bookstore. Well, if she's at the bookstore, right, that would be 0. Ray's is 7 to the right. Numbers to the right of 0 are positive, so that was positive 7. Numbers to the left of 0 are negative. So we've got Furry Friends Pet Store at -7. We have the bookstore at 0 and Ray's at +7. So which one is furthest from Maria? Trick question, New York State. You can't fool us. They're the same distance. Nice try. All right, so the answer to this is they are the same distance. The pet stores are the same distance from the bookstore. Which is in both cases, 7 blocks. All right, there you go. All right, let's look at the next one. It says, on a number line, locate and label a credit of $15 and a debit for the same amount from a bank account. What does 0 represent in this situation? So again, we'll pretend that this is the starting balance, right? So this is where the account was. We'll call that 0, right? So if you have a credit of 15, that means you've been given $15, okay? So that's going to go to the right. Let's count by 5s here. That would be a good interval to jump to get to 15. So there is a credit of 15 and a debit for 15. This would be -5, -10, -15. That would go right here, okay? What does 0 represent? So let's write here, this is the starting balance. That means what the account started with. This 15, this positive 15, is what we call a credit because that was money available to spend, and -15 is the debt or debit that you racked up there. All right, so on a number line, locate and label 20 degrees Celsius below 0 and 20 degrees Celsius above 0. What does 0 represent in this situation? All right, so again, we want 20 below and 20 above, and what does 0 represent? So don't mind this 12 that kind of got magically placed in the middle of my number line. It's not on yours like that, hopefully, so just ignore that. All right, so let's say 0 is right here. That is what we call the freezing point of water in degrees Celsius, all right? So negative 20, I'm going to count by tens here. So negative 10, negative 20. Negative 20 would be right there. This would be 10, this would be 20. And there you go. Nothing terribly complicated. So if you need more time, just raise your hand. I'm sure the substitute will pause this for you. All right, we're moving on. So number 6, a proton represents a positive charge. Positive. Write an integer to represent 5 protons. Well, that's easy. 5 of them would be a positive 5. An electron represents a negative charge. Write an integer to represent 3 electrons. So 3 electrons would be negative 3. All right. Now this is absolute insanity, all right, that they would like me to teach you. So here you go. This is really where it becomes a reading test or question or an example where it's reading and not necessarily the knowledge of mathematics that you have to be careful of, because you guys obviously understand opposites. If the number is positive, the opposite is negative. Same number, except for the sign changes, right, from positive to negative or negative to positive. Now, do you guys see this? Example 1, the opposite of an opposite of a number. It's like a double backflip. I don't know. It just means you're at the same place. Right? So the opposite of an opposite. What is the opposite of 8? 8. All right. What number is 8 units to the right of 0? So if you're going to the right of a number, right of 0, that's positive 8. Right? How can you illustrate locating the opposite of 8? You just draw negative 8. What is the opposite of 8? Negative 8. All right, use the same process to locate the opposite of negative 8. What is the opposite of negative 8? 8. The opposite of a number is the original number. This is the kind of question that's so silly. People get it wrong because their brain is like filtering out that it repeated itself. But remember, the opposite of the opposite is reverting right back to the original number. So there you go. Kind of a silly question if you ask me. How many more of these do they ask you? It's like I'm right here. Is that it? That's going to be the next day. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over a quick few things with you, and then you can have the rest of the class time to work on your homework. So complete the table using the cards in your group. I don't have any cards. I don't have a group. So, all right, so we'll just pretend. Okay, let's say the card is 6. The opposite would be negative 6. The opposite of the opposite would be 6 again. All right, let's come up with another number. 28. The opposite of that would be negative 28. The opposite of the opposite would be positive 28. Let's try a negative one, see if this still works. Let's do negative 3. The opposite of negative 3 would be positive 3. And the opposite of the opposite is going to be negative 3 again. Yeah, Roberto's in here helping me, so this is going to be like deja vu to him. All right, we'll do one more. So let's do negative 12, right? The opposite of negative 12 is? Positive 12. Very good. And the opposite of the opposite is going to be? Negative 12. Yep. See, these are silly questions. Write the opposite of negative 10 as an equation. Okay, so if you take a number and its opposite, and you add them together, like 5 and negative 5, you're going to get 0, right? So, write the opposite of negative 10, opposite of the opposite of negative 10 as an equation. I don't really know what they want you to do there. I'm going to say this. Negative 10 plus 10 equals 0. I don't really know what they want. I think that's silly. But we're going to move on to 8. In general, the opposite of a number is the original number. And that's really what you need to know. You go forward or backwards, then you do the opposite, and then you do the opposite, and you're at the same spot. Okay? So, there you go. Anyway, kind of silly, but it's pretty simple. I mean, there's nothing complex about that. Just, why they would ask us 8 times. All right, the problem set is going to be your homework. So the first part says find the opposite of each number and describe its location on the number line. So what I'd like you to do here is maybe make a chart that says opposite. Okay, and then section this off, and then make a number line of both numbers. So for example, the opposite of -5 is +5, and on a number line, this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, probably hard to see. Hopefully you'll do neater than I am because you don't have teeny tiny places. I don't know, this is like a jumbo crayon. But anyway, -5 would be down here, right? And +5 would be right here. So the location of the opposite would be five to the right of 0. So maybe you want to actually add another section where it's saying what the location of the opposite. So number line, and then we'll call this location of opposite. All right. Anyway, the next one says write the opposite of each number and label the points on the number line. So they give you a number line down here for that one. So point A is the opposite of 9. So the opposite of +9 is going to be -9. So you're going to put a dot there and put point A. Okay. Question 3 says study the first example. Write the integer that represents the opposite of each real-world situation. In words, write the meaning of the opposite. So the opposite of a positive charge would be a negative charge. What's the opposite of a deposit, okay? And then number 4 on a number line, locate and label a credit of $38 and a debit for the same amount. What does 0 represent in this situation? So if you're taking good notes, these should be super easy for you to do. On a number line, locate and label 40 below 0. Now again, this is just a fluke that the page number came up there. So just call that 0 in the middle. All right, you want to locate -40 and +40. And what does 0 represent? So make sure you're answering these questions too about what 0 represents, etc. And you should have a little bit of time to get this finished, or started at least, I should say. So I hope to get a great report from you guys. Thank you for being in class. Please make sure you have this ready for tomorrow to go over at the beginning of class.
I kind of helped.
Roberto kind of helped. Okay. So anyway, thanks, Roberto. Thanks, kids. Be good. Make sure you're working, pushing your chairs and all that good stuff when you leave, blah, blah, blah. See, I'm right here to virtually harp at you. It's lovely. Have a great day. Bye.